The most shocking thing to me about ancient man is the ability to move giant stones. That one is the real mindfuck.
Well, was it the only thing to do back then? So you probably got really good at it, you know?
You got a lot of things to do, dude. You had to hunt, and you had to gather, and you had to make food. You had to make shelter. There's always shit to do, just being a human being. And back then, it was probably way more stressful to get your food than it is today. So I don't buy that.
Or rocks just weighed way less back then.
Could you imagine if that was the case?
Yeah, because there was no way for us to judge that. How much?
It's a great theory.
Please, we know how much rocks weigh, you silly fuck.
Maybe after years of rain, it starts soaking it in, getting some kind of mold.
like a wet towel.
Yeah,
like a wet towel effect for rocks. Some of the stones, like those the Lebanon stones, like in Baalbek, they just how old do they think those are?
Nobody knows. You can't date rocks, but
right.
It's so many of these structures you can't date. And I mean, trying to answer the Baalbek thing via Stonehenge, the traditional explanation of Stonehenge is that it is 3000 BC. But there's one guy, Robert Langdon, who's actually showing that these stones are probably 8000 BC, and he's doing it by basically saying the holes which were found are 8000 by carbon dating results. Some of the stones which are used elsewhere, specifically the blue sarsens, are found in these holes 8000 BC. So he's basically saying you are constantly putting Stonehenge in this 3000 BC framework, but actually the evidence suggests that it is 8000 BC. He's trying to push it out. He's basically trying to do the reinterpretation of this. And in the case of Baalbek, in the case of so many things, it's always circumstantial dating. This building has been repainted, a year, 2 years ago? And imagine if somebody 5 years ago says like, oh, this building, dates from 7 years ago because the paint is 7 years ago. Well, that is circumstantial. In the absence of, you need to go further. You need to be able to find out more. And in the case of this building, you will probably find land registries. You will find so much information which shows that it is probably 30, 40 years. But in the case of things like Baalbek, you don't have anything. You have a bit of plant life or some kind of discarded wood from an ancestors. It's like trying to date Baalbek or Stonehenge or whatever monument by a Twix wrapper, which a tourist has left there 3,000 years from now.
That's funny. That's a funny way of looking at it. How big are those stones, the Baalbek stones?
They're big. Some of the stones in the foundation of the platform are 800 tons. There is one in situ which wasn't completely excavated, which was 1,200 tons. It is absolutely gigantic.
So how tall is that? Is it like 8 feet tall, 9 feet tall?
I think the 1,200 one is...
what about the ones
20,
that actually got
feet.
moved?
Those are about 8 to 12, I think, yes.
Jesus Christ.
Meters and feet.
And so what would be the theory? Like, what is the standard academic theory about how those people who were basically hunter and gatherers, how they figured out how to do that?
Largely, they don't address it. Largely, it's somehow like, oh, look, they're there. The Romans did this. And to a large extent, Baalbek is like that as a whole. It is the second largest temple complex which the Romans built on top. And parts of that haven't been explained by traditional scientists either. They kind of like will go like, well, some of these stones are 200 tons, and we know that the ancient Romans were able to work with cranes of 5 tons. And so they kind of go like, so we need 40 of these cranes. And you kind of go, okay, so where are you going to put them? It's kind of like saying, we need 40 people, but your room can only hold 5. Where are you going to put the 35 extra?
Right.
You have to fit them somewhere, these cranes around this piece of rock. And so they do this all the time, whether it's the Great Pyramid of Egypt. Any pyramid theory about how they are built, as proposed by an archaeologist, is ridiculed by a project manager in the building industry, because they basically go like, you can't do that. You can't build anything like that. It's kind of like saying, how many people do you need for the building of this? And some archaeologists will say, 10,000. Okay, fit them around this pyramid. Put them all in line. They play with some of these numbers. And in the case of Baalbek, when it comes to the foundation stones, some will say, well, we know in the case of Jerusalem that the ancient Romans constructed this and they were using things like 200 or 400 tons. Great. 800 tons is pretty much the double of that. And we don't really know even how the ancient Romans did this. They clearly did, but how they did it in the case of Baalbek is unknown. We can speculate. Wooden rollers are a great device.
Levers, wooden rollers, massive amounts of slaves pushing it, but still.
But if you put a big stone on top of wooden roller, the wooden roller basically gets destroyed. It gets incinerated through the weight. So if wooden rollers were used, somehow our ancestors were able to do something to that wood to make something happen with that wood, which would be able to sustain the weight on top.
Doesn't seem right, though.
No, I mean, and here's the thing. This is what bugs me so much. It is the fact that so much of what our ancestors did remains unexplained on a very mundane level. The most basic things as to how Stonehenge was built, how Avebury was built, why it was built, how this moat was dug, Baalbek, Jerusalem, so many things. It doesn't get explained by scientists, and the reason why is that archaeologists dig these things up and then somehow treat it as if it's their bailiwick, and they're going to come up with the explanations. Now, an archaeologist is good with a shovel, but he has no idea about the building industry, he has no idea about project management, and as soon as some of these people from the outside basically say, we know some of these things, would you like us to help? The archaeologists say basically, fuck off. This is our garden. This is our playground. We don't want you.
Wow. What have you seen, I'm sure you've seen that video, Ancient Aliens Debunked.
I did.
And you wrote a piece about it. Mm-hmm. Have you seen his theory about the interior ramp, of how they constructed it? I saw that. I thought it was fascinating, but it's still, the Great Pyramid is still so bananas. It doesn't help. Just knowing that they made a ramp doesn't help. For folks who don't know the numbers, this is because I used to do a bit about the pyramids. The Great Pyramid of Giza has, 2,600,000 stones?
Mm-hmm.
And if you cut and place 10 a day, it would take you 664 years to build. I read that somewhere. Just 10 of those monster fucking stones a day. It would take you 664 years to make the pyramid. Like that's such a crazy accomplishment, that building.
Well, I mean, a great friend of mine, he's unfortunately having to take care of his dying wife, is Joseph Davidovich. And Joseph Davidovich is a French professor. He's called the father of his own science, geopolymers. And basically, in the 1970s, what he was looking at was he looked at rocks, and he said, okay, I know how rocks are created, geological process, volcanic activity, but is there a way I can recreate rocks in my laboratory? And the answer was yes, he was able to accomplish this, and he called this a geopolymer. And basically a geopolymer is a natural rock, is a man-made rock which looks almost identical to a natural rock. Now there are certain differences. In limestone, for example, you see these little mollusks and all of these other things which are in there, and they're all neatly aligned because the water came in and the wave came out, and they're all perfectly aligned. In a geopolymer, that's not the case, because basically somebody has tossed it in some structure and has basically, over a period of 24 hours to 48 hours, created this thing. So he went to Egypt on a holiday in the late 1970s with his wife, family, looked at the Great Pyramid and said, shit, this is a geopolymer. All of these blocks are made in what I have just discovered. And he began to point out on the Giza Plateau 40 easily identifiable features about these rocks, which anybody who goes there with his book can see for themselves that this isn't natural stone.
That's been disputed, though, right? Hasn't that? I mean, that is the geologists are not agreeing with him.
Well,
there's certain ones that have actually put up a stink about that. What do you think about that?
The great first one, Dr. Zahi Hawass, who we didn't mention early on, he basically said he is an idiot. This is not cement. And it isn't cement. Hawass has no idea what he's talking about. Since then, the likes of Michael Barsoom, who is a professor, I think in Detroit University or somewhere in American University, he has taken pretty much the role up there from Davidovich. They have submitted samples of geopolymers to some of the ancient to Egyptian departments, laboratories, and they basically said, "Oh, this is natural limestone." To which Barsoom and Davidovich said, "No, it's not. We created it a few weeks ago." But the basic problem is this: we have a professor, a father of a science, a guy who has medals left, right, and center. And the archaeologists basically say, go away. This is our playground. We're not even going to listen to what you're going to say. Instead, we're going to pretend that what you were saying is that the Great Pyramid was made of cement, and we know it wasn't made of cement. And that is kind of like the sad thing. And, you know, when it comes to project management, when it comes to all of these disciplines, they basically say, F off. We don't want you here. It's our playground. It's our sandpit.
So there are actually, I'm looking at this, there are many people, very, very intelligent people, that believe that this is made out of concrete. So the propaganda may actually be the people that are disputing it, because some scientists from MIT, it seems like they believe, I'm trying to read this as I'm doing it. Yeah, they believe that this it's very possible that this was what they're calling a limestone concrete, and that they just made powder and mixed it there, and that's why they were all perfect, because they were cut, they were poured into a mold, which is far easier to do, because then you're just carrying bags of shit up there instead of actual pyramids, pyramid stones rather.
I mean, there's one stone which he points out again, like, you know, his books are mostly in French, but he has self-published one in English, and basically, he points out one stone where there is weathering in the middle. Now, weathering of a stone in the middle of a stone doesn't make any sense whatsoever. How is this possible? And the only reason why it's possible is because at one point in time, probably at night, they mixed or they poured one stone to a certain level, and the following day they completed it to the next level, as a result of which the weathering occurred both at the top and in the middle of the stone. But again, you know, throughout the pyramid complex, he's able to show you and guide you around potential evidence, because again, there needs to be more research done. But 40 points is, you know, more than one.
Yeah.
To kind of like do an indication that this might be the case. And the sad fact to me, the thing which abhors me, is that the scientific establishment just basically says, fuck off.
This is his actual position. This makes it actually even more interesting. His position is that only 10% or 20% were cast, and that most of the blocks were cut. This is what he believes. So most of the blocks were carved as suggested by archaeologists, but 10 to 20% were probably cast in areas where it could have been highly difficult to position the blocks. So that's why they can show you blocks that haven't been cast and say, see, these unquestionably were cut. This guy's a fool. But actually, it makes a lot more sense. Like, they figured out both. They figured out how to cast blocks and move them into positions where it would be much more difficult to cut them, and they also cut them as well.
Yeah.
That's fucking really a mind-blowing civilization. You really try to wrap your head around where did they get all that information from, and then you look at their own history and it says they were hanging out with gods. Fuck, man. It sounds so stupid if you buy into it and believe it and bring it up at a dinner party, but if it was real, what a mind fuck that must have been. If human beings really did coexist in the same place as aliens, and they were teaching us.
Were found are 8,000 by carbon dating results. Some of the stones which are used elsewhere, specifically the blue sarsens, are found in these holes 8,000 BC. So he's basically saying you are constantly putting Stonehenge in this 3000 BC framework, but actually the evidence suggests that it is 8,000 BC. He's trying to push it out. He's basically trying to do the
food that it is today. So I don't buy that.
Or rocks just weighed way less back then.
Could you imagine if that was the case?
Yeah, because there was no way for us to judge that. How much?
It's a great theory.
Please, we know how much rocks weigh, you silly fuck.
Maybe after years of rain, it starts soaking it in and getting some kind of mold.
like a wet towel.
Yeah.
A wet towel effect for rocks. Some of the stones, like those the Lebanon stones, like in Baalbek, they just how old are they?
Interpretation of this, and in the case of Baalbek, in the case of so many things, it's always circumstantial dating. This building has been repainted, a year, 2 years ago? And imagine if somebody, 5 years ago says like, oh, this building, dates from 7 years ago because the paint is 7 years ago. Well, that is circumstantial. In the absence of, you need to go further. You need to be able to.
The most shocking thing to me about ancient man is the ability to move giant stones. That one is the real mind fuck.
Mm-hmm. Well, was it the only thing to do back then? So you probably got really good at it, you know?
You got a lot of things to do, dude. You had to hunt, and you had to gather, and you had to make food. You had to make shelter. There's always shit to do, just being a human being. And back then, it was probably way more stressful to get your food. I think those are.
Nobody knows. You can't date rocks, but
right.
it's so many of these structures you can't date. And I mean, trying to answer the Baalbek thing via Stonehenge, the traditional explanation of Stonehenge is that it is 3000 BC. But there's one guy, Robert Langdon, who's actually showing that these stones are probably 8000 BC, and he's doing it by basically saying the whole switch would